Hello everybody and welcome to my presentation on Hilma af Klint and evolving the canon. So, who painted the first abstract paintings? Well, some non-Western cultures had abandoned representation in their artworks long ago. Western artists didn't cross that bridge until the 20th century. According to most art history textbooks, Vasily Kandinsky was the first artist to paint an entirely abstract work, with his untitled watercolor, seen here, from 1910. Because of this innovation, Kandinsky became a key character in the dominant narrative of art history, on par with Cézanne, Picasso, and Duchamp, one of the fathers of modern art. What this narrative fails to tell, though, is that there was an artist who was creating non-representational works before Kandinsky. And that artist is Hilma af Klint. Here we see group number 1, Primordial Chaos, which was painted from 1906 to 1907, a full 4 years before Kandinsky's equally abstract paintings. Although her influence on the other artists in the development of modern art were not as strong as Kandinsky's because of her relative obscurity till the 1980s, Hilma af Klint remains the first abstract painter. And discoveries like this one necessitate changes in the canonical narrative of art history. What is a canon? The canon may be understood as the retrospectively legitimating backbone of a cultural and political identity, a consolidated narrative of origin, conferring authority on the texts selected to naturalize this function. A great example of such a narrative of origin is Alfred H. Barr's diagram, seen on the right here, showing the progression towards cubism and abstraction. Here Barr tracks art's progress in broad strokes labeled as movements, and the result resembles something like a family tree. Neo-Impressionism in Cézanne begot Cubism. Cézanne and Van Gogh in Synthetism begot Fauvism, and so on. The problem inherent in retrospective legitimization is the biases of the legitimizing parties. So the biases of the people who are putting together these kind of diagrams and family trees. These biases are one of the main reasons why Hilma af Klint has been excluded from the narrative. So, Klint's exclusion. The reasons why she has been excluded are summed up here. Firstly, she was a woman. And as Linda Nochlin points out, there have been plenty of great women artists, but none considered supremely great by the structures of retrospective legitimization. Hilma af Klint is one of those artists. She may be considered good, she may be acknowledged as an innovator even, but she has never been considered great. Secondly, she pulls heavily from occultist sources, and art history has some serious secular biases. James Elkins once wrote, "Sooner or later, if you love art, you will come across a strange fact. There is almost no modern religious art in museums or books of art history. It is a state of affairs that is at once obvious and odd, known to everyone and yet hardly whispered about." According to Klint, her abstract paintings were commissioned by a spirit named Amaliel, a source that secular, empirically minded art historians can't help but scoff at. Thirdly, and this has less to do with contemporary biases, Klint was very protective of her work. She only tried to exhibit it once, and upon her death she instructed her nephew to keep all of her paintings hidden until 1980. The reason for this secrecy was because she died during the Second World War, when outcomes were uncertain and the Third Reich was known to hate the occult. So, it is clear that the canon of art history could use an update. Kandinsky, while still greatly influential and due his share of credit, has had his time in the spotlight, and it is time for Klint's work to rise to its rightful place in the story of art. But how can the narrative be changed? Should it be changed? I'm now going to quickly look at a few approaches to remodeling the canon, namely those of Griselda Pollock and Deleuze and Guattari. Griselda Pollock, in her book Differencing the Canon, takes a bit of a pessimistic tone. She writes that there can be no way of, and no point in, adding women to the canon, because she argues the problem is inherent in the differentiation between male artists and female artists in a system that is inherently phallocentric. She suggests instead that we search for ways to be able to write about artists who are men and artists who are women in order to go beyond the concept of binary gender difference. She proposes that the most fruitful path forward is to focus on the maternal, because the concept of the mother is a space, end quote, space and presence that structures subjectivities, both masculine and feminine, but differently. Another approach to remodeling the canon is that of the rhizome, which is a concept that Deleuze and Guattari borrowed from botany and applied to post-structuralist philosophy. It is, in short, a nonlinear system of connections. To use their plant analogy, the traditional art historical canon, like the one we saw from Alfred H. Barr, is arboristic, resembling a tree, while the rhizomic canon is a more loose series of connections. The advantage of this nonlinear model is that it is adaptable, making it much easier to incorporate offshoots and anomalies, like Hilma af Klint. In this model, the narrative of art history would be dissolved, and the canon would become a map of highlights and attractions all presented on the same field, without any hierarchy or starting points. In conclusion, Klint and her work necessitate a change in the narrative and structure of the art historical canon. What that change will look like, and if it is possible, are areas that require further study. While systems like the rhizome allow space for evolution and addition by dissolving the narratives, what these theories look like in practice, and whether audiences and market forces will comply with the radical reshaping of the art world's narrative structures, are questions that remain to be answered. This final illustration here is a more recent update to the origins of abstraction done by the team at Museum of Modern Art in response to Alfred H. Barr's original arboristic diagram. So that's just a little concluding food for thought. Anyways, thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing all of your presentations.